Now there's all kinds of different people in this world. There's only one pie.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Team Made Apart podcast, the podcast designed to teach those who work remotely and those who hire them how to work better together. I'm your host, Ryan Rogar. Before we get started, as always, today's show is brought to you by TeamMadeApart.com. Team Made Apart features articles, tools, and resources designed to teach remote workers and those who hire them how to work better together. A community for owners, managers, leaders, freelancers, contractors, and all variety of remote worker, Team Made Apart is also a terrific resource for companies interested in implementing remote work policies in otherwise co-located environments, or for those planning to build fully distributed organizations from the jump. Listeners of this podcast have an exciting opportunity to get involved in the remote work revolution. In light of current events related to the coronavirus pandemic and a sudden worldwide shift to remote work, we're offering a free remote work best practices guide for leaders who find themselves struggling to create a remote work policy in a pinch. Now, and for the duration of the crisis, visit teammadeapart.com/crisis to not only download your free Team Made Apart Remote Policy Primer, how to write remote work policies that don't suck, but to find other tools and resources to help you weather the storm. Great working relationships make for great remote work experiences, and with this free guide, you'll be better equipped to do your part in creating and maintaining a happy and sustainable remote life. Once again, to take advantage of this collection of useful resources, please visit teammadeapart.com/crisis, that is teammadeapart.com/crisis, to download your free Best Practices Guide. One more thing before we kick off the show. Now, and for the foreseeable future, teammadeapart.com is offering free support and advice to remote workers and remote leaders alike through Team Made Apart Open Office. From noon to 2 p.m. Mountain Time, Monday through Friday, you can visit teammadeapart.com and navigate to the bottom left-hand corner of the page where you'll find a chat icon. Simply click it and you'll be connected to a real, remote work expert who is happy to help you solve problems in real time at no charge to you. Of course, you can use the same tool 24/7, 365 to ask questions or request services, but during open office hours, you've got a direct line of communication to people who care and people who can help. Once again, from noon to 2 p.m. Mountain Time, Monday through Friday, simply navigate to teammadeapart.com, find our chat icon in the bottom left-hand corner of the page, then click for instant support when you need it at no cost to you. Take advantage of this special program while it lasts, and now, back to the show. Today's special guest is Angelina Ebeling. Berlin-based Angelina is the founder and CEO of Acework, a premier online platform built exclusively for matching remote-ready candidates with vetted remote work. Her platform uniquely qualifies candidates and employers alike to facilitate a sort of virtual handshake between the two. This handshake leads to quality connections in which suitable candidates are matched with the high-quality jobs they're looking for, while employers are able to recruit only the most qualified remote workers. Angelina is an expert on the subject of remote work and a well-known speaker, having delivered talks at both TEDx ESADE in Barcelona, Spain, and at the Nomad City conference in the Canary Islands in 2019. Here to talk about hiring and finding quality remote work opportunities online, please welcome to the show, Angelina Ebeling. Hey, Angelina, welcome to the show. Let's kick this thing right off with getting into your background a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about you, how you got into the remote work space, and what you're doing nowadays.
Absolutely. For those who have seen my TED Talk, which I know you have, so thanks for that. You may know that I'm a bit of an accidental remote worker. When in my last job, before I founded Acework, I was responsible for the expansion of a German startup to the US. So basically, I was first in Berlin for them. They were based in Munich, which is about a 5-hour drive away. And then they sent me to New York, and I was the only person in New York building this office. And really quickly did I realize how much I loved working remotely, like being able, to flexibly figure out, when to work, where to work, but also realize that there's a few things that really need to be taken care of for this to work well, right? And then I kind of moved on from that company. I was looking for a new job, and I realized I really want that freedom again. So I looked for remote work online and found out not just that the space was exploding, right? That there were so many new job boards popping up left and right. That was in 2017. So that's probably when We Work Remotely got bigger, like one of those job boards that's pretty established now. And while I realized like the space is growing, there were also so many people looking for remote work. So there was, in other words, big chaos, right? Big chaos in finding jobs and offering jobs. And that's where I saw the opportunity to found something that would help both sides, right? For companies to find great candidates, but also for candidates to, have an easier time finding those good jobs, because remote work can really differ in quality.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, especially in such a sort of, burgeoning frontier. These remote jobs are coming up in all different shapes and sizes, from people who are starting out fully detached to people who are trying to implement these policies and stuff later in life. No two approaches to remote seem the same right now. So it makes sense that there's a lot of disparity in the way that, any given job might be for the worker. Yeah. So it makes sense that it could be a little tough. So tell me then, I guess, you started out basically as a remote worker yourself. You saw this opportunity and you founded Acework, which is a online, portal for people to get connected with great remote jobs. Tell me how you feel about how you see the state of work right now, and how distributed teams and co-located offices and everything are sort of contributing to the future of work.
Absolutely. It's definitely a big question. I'd like to break it down maybe in sort of the perspective of like what lens are you looking through. And it's interesting because you're in the US, it's 10 a.m. in the morning for you. I'm in Berlin, it's just after 6 p.m. And we live in different environments in terms of work as well. So what we've noticed, Acework is based in Berlin. I'm German, I founded the company here, but we're distributed across the world. But we do see a big difference between how far along remote work is in the US. And I think historically, because the US is such a big country, with the advent of the internet, like you guys really embrace remote working much quicker than we have. Germany is comparatively small. I don't know a state in the US that would be as big as it, but I'm sure we could fit into one of your bigger states easily.
Yeah, several probably.
Probably several. But we're 83 million people in it. Right? So we're quite a lot of people, densely populated. So remote work here, the state of remote work is not as far advanced. And that's one of the challenges that we have seen, right? Is to see, you said not all remote companies are created equal, to really move in that direction of how can we help the companies that are further along, to find great candidates, but also how can you help companies that are maybe not that far at all yet? And I think in sort of the context of the whole, like how is remote work fitting into the future of work, I think it is already here, right? Like it's already practiced informally, formally, doesn't really matter. But offices are changing as well, right? Like we have co-working spaces. So many companies move into co-working spaces because they believe it fits much better to the way they work. And that's how it's going to be. It's just going to be at different speeds, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it, is at different speeds. Some people, so much of it seems like is tied to risk tolerance and other things like that, because companies see getting into remote work as a risk. And I think we're also sort of maybe disadvantaged a little bit in the remote workspace by some of these visions of people working from beaches and things like that. Because as an employer, you see that and you go, oh, well, I can't have my workers chilling on the beach all day. Because there's these old perceptions to break through and things like that, where you've got to convince them basically that, productivity will still be there, whether I'm on that beach or wherever I am located. And so I think that there's some like kind of old school challenges to overcome. And then, the technology and all that stuff is starting to emerge, but also the way that people develop these processes to manage remote teams and stuff. I think there's still quite kind of a bridge to cross there. For people who've worked remotely, it starts to come more naturally. You understand how it would work or how best to facilitate these relationships. But I think for employers, it's still a challenge.
Oh, absolutely. And one of my theses is definitely that probably in the past 5 years, we have created and adopted to the tools that really enable remote working, right? Before that, there's like so many articles now. It's like, I don't know who it was, maybe IBM. We rolled back on their remote work program, which they had started, I don't want to say decades ago, but a long time ago, and they said it didn't work. And I can't really imagine how you could have worked remotely 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I couldn't, like the way we're connected now through Zoom, through all these different tools really makes that high touch, we're a startup, right? So we're like obviously highly collaborative, iterating fast, decisions have to be made quickly, all of those things. How that would have been possible with the technology that was available 20 years ago.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. I mean, even in my own experience, I started my business originally from the back of a tour bus while I traveled around the country working for different musical groups. And as a young designer then, the way I stayed in touch with my clients was I would like be able to tether to my little BlackBerry Pearl and connect at like 28K to the internet. And like, it wasn't a great experience, but it was doable, and by staying cognizant of my email and staying in touch as often as I could and things like that, like, we kind of made it work. But the life of a freelancer is a little bit different or a little bit unique to that of, the remote worker working for a larger company or something. And so I think that, while there's some similarities, there's a lot of nuanced differences. And so I think it's important. And I almost wonder if some of the problem, like you mentioned this IBM article, I wonder if some of the problem or the way they're communicating isn't a vernacular issue. So they're talking about remote work, but I mean, what they know of remote work from 20 years ago is this thing where somebody wasn't on site or something. But, that definition may not wholly line up with what we're doing now.
Definitely true. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that there's, at least some aspect of that. I mean, even, also again, in my own experience, I spent the last 15 years calling myself a digital nomad. And it was only after getting into this space and starting to spend time around remote workers and the stuff that I realized the distinction. And so, and it's a vast distinction. Like I'm nowhere near a digital nomad. And so it's been kind of eye-opening for me, but I think in terms of the industry, because I'm closer to it than a lot of people are. And for me, I'm still discovering new things every day. I imagine for people, larger companies who've been in business a long time and who are now trying to adopt remote work policies, either as a way to, retain employees or add to employee happiness, things like that. Assuming they have the right motives for trying to get into it. I think that, there's a lot of opportunity, but I think there's a lot of problems in the way that people define things. So I think that, like I mentioned earlier, the idea of the guy working on the beach seeming kind of unappealing to the CEO, I think that there's some breakdown in communication there that it might just be definitions or the way we talk about things. And so I think as the industry grows, standardization of these terms will maybe help with some of that.
Yes, I think standardization makes complete sense. And it's interesting that, you bring up misconceptions like digital nomadism, like what is it? Remote workers are people that just work at the beach. And I think one of the people that has been really pushing for those standardizations and bringing the conversation to a level where it makes sense, economically speaking, and for everyone, is Laurel Ferrer, who I understand is probably, the episode that has aired already.
Yeah.
And she's, I mean, I don't have to repeat her mantra, but she basically, keeps talking about like the relevance of remote work beyond, those misconceptions, and really saying like, it's absolutely not true that a remote worker is someone who works at the beach. That may happen, but most of the time it doesn't. It's really about the economic impact this can have on different areas, the environmental impact that we have when we, work from much more effective places and so on. And I think that's really one of those things that as a space, as an industry, we're all trying to figure out. And that's why I love being in it right now, is because there is so much happening and there is so much being shaped together collaboratively that, we are really moving towards that we, get someone who's not been in touch with this. And you've been a remote worker, not a digital, but a remote worker for such a long time, that like now we can carry that outside to people who have never even heard of the concept. And I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, I think it is a great time. And it's funny because, I mean, for people like you who've been in the space much longer than I have, like, I mean, I'm sure it feels like there's a lot of people doing this, but when you really start to look at it, I mean, it's still a pretty new concept for a lot of people. And to be able to do it at scale, it's totally new. And so I think, I think it's an exciting time to be in here. And so I guess to kind of sort of keep this thing moving a little bit, let's get into a couple of questions for like employers. One of the things I'm wondering, and like I say, my background is as a freelancer. So admittedly, my strength isn't in understanding the corporate perspective on this stuff. And that's why I'm reaching out to people like you who have a better understanding of that. So for currently co-located or traditional companies, the idea of implementing a remote workforce or something could be attractive for a number of reasons. Good reasons, bad reasons, economic reasons. But so how do you coach up a company who's interested in maybe dipping a toe in or sort of exploring remote work as a possibility who've never done so in the past?
That's actually a really good question because in the strictest sense, like what we do with connecting talent to companies, we're probably at I would say like the tail end of that whole process of going remote, right? Like I don't want to work with a company and match them with candidates without them being ready for them, right? Because what will happen is that they hire this person, they think, oh, this is great, like we found our match. This person will work for 6 months with that company and then get highly disengaged because the company keeps forgetting about them or processes are not in place. It's just going to be a disaster, right, for both sides. And then they're going to come back to me and say, like, hey, this wasn't a great experience. What could we have done better, right? So we, like in our core service, we're very much not that, right? But that said, yes, we do help companies that say, hey, you know what, we'd be interested in hiring someone remotely for diverse reasons. There's a variety of things we tell them, right? There's, first of all, kind of the option of like, yeah, look into the space. There's a lot of resources out there already. There's types of courses, like Workplaces is one of them, where you can gain remote work capacities in a very structured way. You could work with a consultant, like Laura Ferret does, consulting for distributed teams. So we do that when we notice it's a company that really is at the infancy of remote working. If there's something that we can do with them, yes, we would, and they have tools in place where we say, oh, actually, this is a tool that a lot of remote companies use, Slack, for example, right? Mm-hmm. Then we'd ask, how do you use Slack? Do you use it as a synchronous tool where everyone is always on Slack and you have chats going on? Or do you use it as an asynchronous tool where, let's say, I post a question and then my colleague 3 time zones further back replies in their time. So it becomes more of a asynchronous communication. Mm-hmm. So we do that with them a little bit. And I always encourage companies to really think about 3 things, right? The first thing is, how do you collaborate together? Like how do you make actual collaboration work? Like what tools do you use for that at the moment? How do you communicate? Is most of your communication when you are co-located very informal in, face-to-face, we talk about something? Or do you actually, already use emailing back and forth? A lot of companies that are co-located work in remote ways, right? So Sure. Think about your processes there. And then the last one to me, which is highly important, is documentation, which we noticed pretty early on. And me as sort of like I'm first-time founder, right? And I'm the first-time manager of a team of that size. And I really learned like, oh, okay, like I don't want to bug people and become like an annoying micromanager who keeps like asking like, so like how far along is this? How far along is this? That's the last thing I want to do. Like I don't want to waste their time. I don't want to waste my time. So I really just want to be able to clearly see progress somewhere. And for that, you need documentation. For us, that's Asana, but for other teams, that's probably something else. Probably they have something in place already. So I think those are really the 3 pillars. Another radical thing that I have recommended to companies, no one has done it yet, but I know a company who has done it when they wanted to figure out like how can we implement remote work, is that they just didn't allow the entire team, the entire company to come to an office for a week, which is highly radical, right? It will immediately show you where are our gaps, where are we missing something, where are there suddenly tasks that are not getting done, where are our misunderstandings in our communication. But that way you can actually really easily and quickly see what are the holes that we need to fill for this to work, right?
Oh yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, it of course, like maybe don't do it in like a hypercritical work week where have to deliver 5 important projects to your clients. Maybe don't make it a week. Maybe just make it 2 days or 3 days. I don't know. Depends on team sizes as well. But I think that's really something, if you are serious about it and you could test it, you could try that. Also, sending managers away, also really good, you know. I have that with teams who are, you know, not very first, dipping my toe in, but teams that are hybrid, you know, that have an office somewhere and have a few remote workers here and there, but mainly they're co-located, right? Mm-hmm. And then I have a CEO or like a team lead telling me like, oh yeah, our remote workers, they're fully included. Like we have such a great culture with them and everything's working fine. And then I speak to a remote worker in that same team and they really say like, oh, you know what? Like actually video calls with the team are horrible, you know, because quality is not working or something like this. Yeah. It's very easy to just have a manager walk in someone else's shoes, walk on the remote worker's shoes for a week or for just a team meeting to see, is it really how we think it is when we are all in that conference room? And we think all is great.
Yeah. And I think to that end, like, you know, how can an employer, I mean, I imagine this happens sometimes, but I mean, you tell me from your experience, I mean, are there often employers who come to you and say, yeah, we're looking for new remote workers who maybe aren't that good at it? Like they've been doing it for a while, but they aren't good at it. And they need to, you know, maybe take, you know, some of these steps to walk in other people's shoes or see it from another perspective. But like, it seems like in this space, it feels like if you've been doing it for a long time, well, then you know how to do it versus, you know, and so, but I wonder if that's not necessarily true. So I wonder if employers can kind of, you know, what they can do to build a work environment that serves both, you know, remote employees and co-located employees sort of equally. Because I mean, you know, there are a lot of problems for remote workers in terms of, you know, emotional problems and feeling, you know, sort of distanced from the rest of their team or not being included. And you've sort of alluded to some of these things already, but, you know, what can an employer do to sort of be introspective? You know, you mentioned a couple examples, but do you have any other ideas?
Absolutely. And it's actually one of those conversations that we want to have with companies that approach us to hire talent, which we kind of start at that reason, like, why do you want to go remote? You know, we vet all of our candidates, as you mentioned before. So they go through a remote readiness screen. And we think it's only fair that companies go through not the same, but also a type of vetting process, right?
And, because we want... Yeah, I think that's what's so innovative about Acework, in my mind anyway, is this sort of two-way street. You're right. I mean, there's so many people, and I mean, I've applied, you know, for some remote jobs and things like that don't do a lot of vetting, really. It's just a traditional application, you know, just like anywhere. And so, but this idea that both the, you know, remote worker needs to be highly vetted, as does the employer, I think that level of distinction is sort of what separates your platform from others.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a few job boards that kind of say, you know, we handpick remote opportunities. That sometimes is true, sometimes not so much. But at least I mostly know that they don't have like one-on-one conversations with them. So I virtually sit down over Zoom, as we do right now, with those companies. And I speak with them about their company culture, right? Like, how many employees do you have now who are remote, who are not remote? You know, how do you include them? And then I look out for things like, oh yeah, for example, we have, you know, like a water cooler channel on Slack. That's a very simple one to say, hey, or an indicator that they are looking to foster relationships outside of just task-based work, right? Which I think is really something that glues a company together, is just having those additional moments of human connection, you know, certain practices.
Yeah, no, it's so true. Yeah. And I mean, the relationship you build, whether you're in-house, co-located, freelance, whatever you are, I mean, those relationships are kind of what keep people coming back for more, right? They need to know you, like you, trust you. And if they're not feeling connected, or they're not being taken care of because they're off-site, or any other things like this, then, you know, that doesn't make for a very long-term relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Another interesting aspect is the hiring process, actually, because that often is an indicator how a company or a team wants to include or integrate a remote worker. Like for me, red flag, usually, I mean, companies that just say, I basically just want to outsource this job or task or, you know, anything like that. We definitely tell them, I don't think we're the right platform for you. Right? Because I do believe that hiring for remote roles works a little bit differently. Like you want to check if the person is going to succeed in a remote environment, right? Do they have the soft skills? to work independently, to structure their own work, to be proactive enough, all of those. And we vet for that on the candidate side. But if a company really has a hiring process for a remote worker that resembles more that of like, I need a job done freelancer type thing, like when you have a 2-month project for, I don't know, like a quick design thing you need to be, have done, or something where you kind of say it's a one-off, and they screen remote workers like that, and they don't screen for values alignment or, does that person add anything to our culture? To me, that's a red flag that the remote worker is probably not treated as the person in the office. And is not good for any side of them. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's really insightful. And actually, it sort of leads me into my next question. I wanted to ask you what sorts of skills, one should consider if they hope to find remote work, either for the first time seeker who's never done remote work before, or if you've worked remotely before. And as I was talking about with companies who may not be able to look internally and they think they're good at something, but they're not. Is there a way for people who have been working in some capacity remote or as a freelance or something for a long time, but how can we sort of, I don't know, do kind of a skills check and make sure that we've got what it takes to actually, fulfill the obligations that we're getting into with some highly vetted company, like for example, using Acework as a platform, or if we're a first-time job seeker and we're trying to get out there and we think remote might be for us, but we've never done it before. Like, what kinds of skills should we consider, and where do you think we can find them? I mean, obviously there are resources online, but I'm open to ideas.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's 2 parts to this. I think there's the challenge of working remotely, right? So do you have the skills to do that, which I mentioned before, right? Which are, specific soft skills that we do screen for. Yeah, you can. There's a lot of research out there. I can't cite anything on the top of my head right now, but there's a lot of research out there, like what traits are that a remote worker should have. That's definitely something, an introspection on, those soft skills, your personal motivation, like why do you want to work remotely? Is it because, you do want to, travel the world and, work from beaches most of the time? From the perspective of like looking at a lot of candidates and a lot of companies, if you're looking for a full-time job with one company, that's what we focus on. It may actually be a little bit hard to find a job like this. I always say, okay, if you are looking to become a digital nomad who really jumps time zones a lot and, is looking to maybe take a week or 2 off to like explore Southeast Asia and like not work, it may be smarter to be a freelancer, because then you are really, self or like,
well, yeah,
you kind of really can, you can decide, I'm going to do a project. I'm going to, crunch this out, work for 3 months straight. And then I'm going to take 2 months off because then I have the cash and I, can explore.
Yeah. And I think to your point, it's a different mindset, right? It's this idea of project based so that I can jump and jump and jump. And really what's number one in that, in that relationship is that person's lifestyle, whatever it is they're looking for, versus maybe somebody looking for full-time remote work who, you need to put your employer up there at least sort of equal with you in terms of, you may want some things personally in terms of career and stuff like that. But, in order to have sort of an equal or a fair relationship with your employer, you need to take care of them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really where, long-term employment is very different, is that continuity, right? That you will have responsibilities and you can't just take that week off. So I think that's really thinking about like, why do you want to get into it, and like what type of remote work will be the best for you? Then you have the best chances of actually going out there and finding it. Because, from my personal experience, it is a vast pool in a lot of ways. It is quite chaotic still, I'm, not putting Acework out there as like the one singular solution to find a job, because I don't think we are that, at least not yet. I think there's a lot out there. So I always recommend like really figure out, why do you want to do it? Do you have the soft skills? And then look at like, what are my marketable skills that companies would want to pay money for, right? I think that's something that in general, when you're looking for a job, you do that. But in remote work, you have to be even more focused on it, because companies that hire remotely often hire from a global talent pool, or at least partially global, and they really want to find that, I want to call like perfect fit, that has everything, that has the culture alignment, that has the exact skills for the job. So don't apply for something where you think like you can do 50% of that job, but the other 50% like you don't have the experience in, or you'd have to learn it on the job. That's very, very tough, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And we've seen like highly marketable skills, the people that get the most job matches are somewhat experts in their fields. Like I find it's harder for people that have done a little bit of this here and there. Like, oh, I've done a little bit of marketing, I've done a little bit of sales, I've done a little bit. Yeah, that's harder to place for us. But if it's someone who has like 5 years of solid UX design experience,
Sure.
you know, that person is easier to place for us.
Well, I think it makes sense from sort of a risk mitigation perspective too, right?
Yeah.
If you're an employer and you're trying to bring on new talent, whether it's co-located or remote, you know, you're probably trying to fill a role, something that's missing in your company already. And so to find somebody with specific expertise in that thing you're looking for is probably valuable. And then to do it for a remote person who happens to have the very specific expertise, you know, one of the beauties of remote work is that, you know, you alluded to it, is this idea that you're not hiring from a local pool. You know, it's not the 30 people in, 20-mile radius of your office or whatever. It's, could be hundreds, thousands of people from all over the planet. And you may be able to find people who are infinitely better by having this broad pool to hire from. That brings with it some problems. Now you've got to whittle down 1,000 people or whatever it is. And, so it could present its own challenges. But I think, at the same time, it makes sense that niching down and finding people with specific expertise could be really valuable to a company. You started to talk a little bit about it in terms of soft skills, but I wonder if you could talk or speak to how personality factors into all this. So, I mean, some of it you mentioned, alignment with sort of vision or culture within a company. But I mean, some people can hack remote and some people just can't. Like, I mean, there are folks who just don't have the right attitude or right personality for it. Do you have any thoughts about that?
That's quite interesting that you say that, because what I've seen also is people that have not worked remotely before but think they would love it, start doing it, and then realize like, oh, actually, this is horrible.
Oh, interesting.
Like I feel lonely, or I can't switch off, or like whatever issue you may have.
Sure.
So yeah, as much as you can reflect and think about it before, and you think you know yourself, like learn like actually figuring it out and doing it probably is the best indicator. And
well, and would you advocate for somebody sort of tiptoeing in or trying it a little bit, see if they can maybe do a little work, or maybe talk to their present employer about stepping out a little bit? Like, I mean, are there ways to kind of, if you've never done this before, you think you might have an interest in it, are there ways to sort of test or try before, going all the way, quitting your job and looking for new work?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually one of those things that we recommend a lot of people to do is like, are you currently employed? And they're like, yeah. But it's, it's a co-located job. And often they haven't even asked about, can I go remote? Can I take a day home office or whatever? Like, I think some companies are very clear on this. They have a clear policy of what is possible and what isn't. But in a lot of companies, it's not clear. And I've seen that someone said for personal reasons, she had to move from Frankfurt to Berlin. And the company didn't want to lose her. So they just let her work remotely. Like, they knew her well before, and then she tried it out, right? So I think that's actually the best way to go remote, is go with an existing job where you know the people already, and you kind of test it for yourself. You can figure out if it works for you. For her, actually, it didn't work that well. Like, she didn't like it very much. And I think, it was partially personality based, but also partially because the company just let her go, but didn't actually build real processes for her. But actually, she then started to feel a little bit disengaged. So that could be a little dangerous. Another thing is what you could try that has worked for one of my contacts is ask to go on like a temporary remote test work. For example, ask your employer, can I do remote year, which is a 4-month program or a 6-month program where, you work from different cities around the world. It really pushes you in terms of like change as well, right? Because you do 1 month in a place that's not a long time. Right? That's the digital nomadism we talked about earlier. Sure. See if that works for you. What challenges come up? And in terms of personality, I do think that extroverts tend to have a harder time in remote work.
Oh, interesting. See, I might have thought the other way, thinking that an extrovert, would reach out more, feel more comfortable on camera, for example. I know for a lot of introverts, getting like on a Zoom call or something, face-to-face kind of, maybe they don't feel good about how they look on camera or whatever, it seems like those would be like introvert problems. So yeah, maybe explain that a little bit.
So interestingly, so for me, an extrovert is someone who gets energy from conversations and from other people, like an external motivator, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not 100%, but like that's kind of like the loose thing. And introverts, like really, it's more intrinsic, right? So for them, it is a lot easier, you know, to like not be so like being with people drains them, right? And often, you know, companies work quite asynchronously in, you know, a remote environment. So you will communicate with your team members on Slack and you have a lot less face-to-face interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And extroverts tend to miss that. And I'm more of an extrovert. So I get a lot of energy. Like most of my conversations are with partners or with companies to talk about, you know, Acework in an external way. And for me, that's really important because I get my energy from that, right?
Sure.
But a lot of remote jobs are then quite isolated sometimes. I know there's some companies, you know, where like you highly collaboratively work together and you're on Zoom calls all the time, or maybe you're in a virtual office. But if you are in a company that's a tech company and you do, I don't know, performance marketing for them, like it can happen that for an entire day, like you don't speak to anyone.
Sure.
Right. And for an extrovert, that can be hard. Introverts, I think, can really rise to the occasion, right, with remote working. Because when you have time to think about an answer, to write it down, like you actually get a lot more out of introverts, because sometimes in a phone call or in a team meeting in a room, introverts are often overlooked because extroverts are quick to start speaking, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the introverts usually sit there and they don't say that much. So I think that's where you can really enable introverts as well. And that has nothing to do with proactiveness, by the way, which I think what you were alluding to, which is a soft skill, where you say, you know, you have to be proactive to find solutions when you hit roadblocks, right? The introvert would still message their manager or a colleague and be like, hey, I need help with this. So I think that's one of the important soft skills that you need to have. Whether you're extrovert, introvert, doesn't really matter. But you need to be proactive finding solutions, whether to look for them yourselves, knowing when to ask for help. Because other than that, like, yeah, that's when remote work can get blocked and nobody notices.
Yeah, that's a great distinction. So to switch gears a little bit, you started to talk about this earlier, but I think it might be worth revisiting or at least digging into a little bit more. Some of the reasons that, you know, one, if you're a company who's never engaged in any kind of remote work policy and you're thinking about doing it, or if, you know, maybe you do it presently, but you need to check your reasoning or try and maybe understand your motivations for doing so. I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about, you know, just sort of general terms, why one might engage in remote work. And, you know, the ones that you mentioned that made me think to ask you about this were things like environmental challenges and things like that. I think so many people get caught up looking at bottom lines and things like that they maybe don't think about these further out ripples that, you know, could sort of maybe be more impactful, maybe in a philanthropic sense that you're trying to do good for the world, but also, I mean, maybe even to your bottom line, maybe longer term, you're cutting down on one thing or another. And so I wonder if you talk a little bit about just sort of, you know, in your experience, the business perspective on why they're considering going remote, or if they are remote, why they're doing it.
That's interesting. I'd say most companies are still very much focused on positive business outcomes, whether that's bottom line and like we're going to make more money, but also improving the lives of the people in the company, right? So that I think has been one of the main drivers. Some companies come or have started remote out of a real like problem, like saying like I cannot find the people I need to make my business go on at all, right? So they say, hey, example, small software company somewhere in Austria, you know, not in the big city, 2-3 developers, built something great, like needed to hire more people. And they were like, they're not where we are, like not even in like 100 kilometers around us. Like they just have to go remote like that, right? So I think that's what's happening more and more, is that companies pop up in different places doing something, as you said earlier, like highly specialized as a company, right? And then they can't find those people. So I think that's probably one of the main reasons. With large companies that are already, you know, 1,000 people plus, and they want to make that shift, they really vary. You know, they say, oh yeah, we want to increase employee happiness. We want to generally become more attractive to younger talent. I think it's really something that drives millennials and Gen Z. You know, that they want to sort of have this as a long-term goal, build it up as a capacity for the not immediate future, but sort of medium-term future. I have not come across a company that says like, we want to reduce our environmental impact and that's why we don't want to have an office anymore. That's quite interesting. I'm sure they're out there. Like, I'm not saying that they're not, but like, I haven't had one approach us.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you make any distinction in terms of, you know, and maybe you don't say this to your prospective clients. I mean, we're all trying to get work here, but I mean, do you make a distinction between sort of good and bad motivations? Like we were talking about with employees, you know, proper motivation is key, right? I mean, if you're just looking for this, you know, somebody to pay your bills while you flit around the world, you may be able to find an opportunity like that, but it could be challenging. So have you come into situations where a company wants to, I don't know, leverage remote work because they can just pay everybody like way less money? Or like, I mean, are there negative sides to this as well?
Absolutely. And I've had companies come to me with that. I don't want to say they did it out of malicious reasons, but it's often, for example, like startups that have very limited budget for payroll. And for them, that's an outsourcing kind of thing, right? So you think, oh yeah, customer success. I don't really want to pay someone in the US, but I know in the Philippines, I can get that job done for like $4 an hour, right? Or even less, I don't know. So they start looking for talent in the Philippines, or they ask like, do you have talent in the Philippines? And they say, but actually we don't really. And like, to me, that sounds a lot like you want to outsource, especially when it's very particular jobs, like, you know, customer service is one of them. There is development also. Like I've had people come to me and be like, oh, like what's your developer's like hourly rate? And I don't even know that. Like I know their like expected annual salary, like that's what we ask for. But if someone already asks me like, so, you know, what's the hourly rate? Like I see that as a red flag. And I think that it is legitimate to look for people that way. I don't say it's a wrong reason. For us, it's not a good fit. Yeah. But that can lead to, if you really want to build a remote company, like a successful long-term distributed team, that can really lead to problems. Like when you start paying people kind of the exact minimum that you can pay them in the country that they live in, what you're going to create is a team that has really high differences in their income, right?
Sure.
So you're going to have someone in the Philippines who works for $4 an hour, and maybe your, I don't know, developer sits in San Francisco and they earn, what is it, like $150K a year, like
an hour or something.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that's where, you know, you're going to start running into issues with your team to have that. So I think it's just going to make your life harder down the line if you really wanted to build a distributed team.
Well, and it sounds like, I mean, what I'm hearing really is the difference in focus, whether it's maybe, I mean, you know, and I agree with you. I mean, I work in the creative industry and it's not uncommon to go to, you know, Eastern Europe or something for programming, or into India or Pakistan or something for web development or programming, things like this. Different design resources, even a lot of times. South America is really common also. And so it's not uncommon to, you know, try and lower your, you know, the cost of your freelance rate or whatever, so that you can make a little bit more profit on the other end. So I don't know that I would necessarily categorize that as bad, but I think the distinction I'm trying to make is sort of the value you put on people. And so like you mentioned in some, I think I read an article that you wrote recently, and you mentioned Acework is a people first company. And so even though you're a small startup and you're just kind of getting going, you know, you've just hit the ground, ethically speaking, you guys are already people first. So the decisions you're making are being driven by the good of, you know, what you can do for the people who work for you. And so, and I don't know that everybody has that motivation, you know, that everybody, I mean, I at least in my experience, I've come across a couple companies, and I won't, you know, name them, of course, but there's situations where I see them making, you know, kind of what feel like silly decisions, like, you know, getting a ping pong table, or, you know, now everyone gets free lunch and things like that. But it's not so much that they want to, but it's that they have to. So it's not that they were looking out for the needs of their employees per se. They were just trying to be competitive with other companies. And so there's a little bit of this vibe where people are doing things because they're getting outside pressure, versus the companies that are sort of built from the inside with a culture that cares about their people. and, might look at a disparity between their developer in the Philippines and their developer in San Francisco and say, you know what, we need to normalize that a little bit just so that everybody feels good about their job. Yeah. And so, so I wonder, if you've observed that, at least sort of the differences in management styles or the difference in companies and the way they're made up, if you have any sort of experience with sort of this idea.
Absolutely. And it's quite interesting that you bring that up for the reason that I actually recently spoke to a company that made the shift from we are co-located to remote. Because one of the CEOs the CEO was going to a different place, right? And they were like, oh, this could be a good opportunity, for everyone to go remote. And then obviously similar to, introducing a ping pong table or free lunch at an office as a perk, you start introducing remote work as a perk for, the employees that are in an office without listening to them or, without actually making this like a change management process. You can actually run into a lot of trouble because often it is founders, entrepreneurs, CEOs, really high level team members that just take that advantage of oh, I want to work flexibly. I travel a lot anyway for work and then whatever. If I'm not in the office for a week, that's fine. And now they say, oh, we want it for everybody. For some people, that is quite hard, because they actually really like going to the office. And it's really, what drives and motivates them is that environment that they're in. So I think that's quite interesting to make that distinction and figure why do you want to introduce remote working? Is it as a perk, as a benefit for, the people that are already there? Do they even want it? Or do you really want to do it because it's more... Yeah, in that, do I really want to build something that is, a new system going beyond just being just a ping pong table type thing?
Well, and I think it goes back to the example you gave earlier of your friend who had been with the company for some time, decided to go remote. They let her because they knew her, liked her, trusted her, and allowed it to happen. But didn't bother to put any process in place, didn't, adapt their culture or anything to embrace her and make sure that, the sort of the emotional side of your engagement with the company was being met. And ultimately it didn't work out. And so, and it sounds like in a case like this, they run out remote as, oh, well, everybody wants to be able to work remotely, but don't think about sort of the policies behind that or the HR implications, to try and make that situation better for those people.
Yeah.
And so, and then to your point too, not everybody does want it. I happen to work with one company or consult with a company that just implemented, or I guess last year implemented unlimited remote or unlimited time off. And so, and this is one of these perks that, a lot of companies in their sector have been starting to implement. And so they decided to go for it too. And I remember at first they rolled it out and then within a month they killed it, right? Because all of a sudden everybody was taking time off and they didn't know what to do and they got scared for a moment. And then they got brave and they decided to go back to it. So there's this back and forth, which is weird because they have about 200 employees. So it created a, communication nightmare to go back and forth and back and forth. But ultimately they landed in a position where they realized that people were sort of self-governing. And actually, even though they have unlimited time off, most of them don't take any more than they did before. And in some cases they take even less because now there isn't this pressure to make sure you get your 2 weeks out or, well, here in the US, it's just 2 weeks. So
I know I have special thoughts about unlimited pay time off because here it's so highly regulated that for us, it's not even a thing to.
Well,
to
and I wonder, is it even that big of a deal? I mean, I don't know what the rules are specifically in Germany. I know in Holland, I think they do 5 weeks.
20 days minimum.
Yeah. And so,
that's
and a lot of times,
by law, by the way, by law, you have to give 20 days. Most companies do 25, I would say. So 5 weeks is standard. And then we're at 28. So we're a little bit above. And then there's companies that do more, that do 6 weeks. France, 6 weeks, easy, like that by law.
Well, and then I know aren't there regulations also to do with, they have to provide some money for vacations and things like that. So they set money aside. I've at least heard of that, with a Dutch company anyway, that they would hold on to a certain amount of funds. I assume it's built into your salary and stuff like this, but they hang on to some money that, to sort of encourage you to go on vacation. Take your time. Here's some money. Now you can pay for your vacation. Go get out of here.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe not necessarily pay, but at least you are people are supposed to take the time off that you give them. Right.
Well, and I think it's such a cultural thing too, and we do a lot of work in Spain and, they really value time off in Spain. And so, they have lots of holidays where everything is a long weekend and things like that. And actually in our company, what we had to do to accommodate was our American teammates basically get about 80% of the Spanish calendar, and the Spanish employees get about 80% of the American calendar, and we sort of mushed them together. So we have one calendar that sort of accommodates both national, main holidays. We don't get every like church holiday and things like that off here in the States that's happening in Spain. But what we realized is working with Spanish counterparts is it didn't make any sense to try and, get around this. Like they were not going to come to work those days, period. And so we can either beat it, you can't beat them, join them kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an interesting challenge that you start getting as a remote team is, one of them is salary differences, right? Another one is when are people off? In the US, you are a melting pot anyway of different religions and cultures, and people, sometimes maybe take Chinese New Year's off or like Hanukkah, like, something. Germany is very much like we have our holidays and everyone just takes them. So as soon as you introduce someone who's from a different background, like we had to think about like what days are off. So for us, it is, in your country, you take your days off and you're just not there those days, right? Our American colleagues take 4th of July off. No brainer, whereas we in Germany, we continue working. So I think that's just something that you need to start dealing with.
Yeah. Well, and like I say, that's how we accommodated or how we dealt with it in our, and we're just a small group, but in our situation was, our Spanish counterparts get 4th of July off, but we'll take, Three Kings off in January, and so it's sort of the same, I guess we're just trying to simplify our life. We're all working at the same times as much as we can. Yeah. And so it's not 100%, but we're about there. So cool. So as we get down to the end of this show, Angelina, I wondered if you wouldn't just sort of break down a couple last things, maybe some parting shots, maybe a little advice for people seeking work, like maybe how they narrow down or choose the jobs they should apply for versus going all out for everything, and how to maybe stand out in a crowd, or, maybe even something from the employer's perspective. Really just anything sort of actionable we could share with the listening audience.
Absolutely. And I mentioned this before to you that I am assuming there's at least a few people here that are seeking work, because there is a lot of people looking for remote work. You always encounter them at different meetups and virtual events and so on. So one of the things that I always say is don't try and make a career change and look for remote work at the same time. It's going to make your life infinitely harder. Right? So I don't know. Example, you've been in sales 15 years and now you want to get into marketing, right? You've done an online course. You now know how Facebook ads work, and now you want to get a remote job in marketing. It's going to be really hard. The companies will want to hire you for your 15 years of sales experience, and very few companies will want to hire you for your Facebook ad course, right? So those people I usually recommend try and get some freelance work, build up a reputation, like build up expertise. At Acework, we require 2 years of relevant work experience. You would get into Acework because you've worked in sales for so long. But when you then select, I only want marketing positions, you'll probably not get any matches, right?
Right.
In general, I think 1 year of experience is the smallest I've seen. Usually it's 3 years. Most often it's 5 years, right? So remote companies really tend to look for senior people. Senior developers are hard to find. So that's one of those that get matched all the time. If you're a senior developer looking for great remote jobs, probably will have them. For companies, what I'd say is get your hiring processes ironed out. Like for the ones that haven't done remote hiring yet before, know what your hiring process is. Be aware that if you post on an open job board, we're a closed platform, right? When you post with us, you may get a few candidates. You can handle that. You'll do your interviews, you're good. But if you post on, I don't know, whether it's a big platform like Indeed or a Stepstone, that's just all jobs, or you're on a remote job board, you're going to get hundreds of applications, probably, right? If you don't do a completely shitty job at representing your company online, you're going to get a lot of applications.
Yeah.
But the quality of those applicants is not 100% what you'll be looking for. There's still going to be 90% of people who are completely irrelevant to you, you'll have to reject, right? So you're going to have a much more intensive screening process. Being aware of that, managing your recruiter's time, right? Like managing, how much you can handle, really important. Candidate experience can rapidly deteriorate if you open up to remote work. Like I've seen there's a few companies out there in the space that have garnered the reputation for having horrible candidate experiences. And it's not because they, are shitty recruiters. They're not. They're probably great people, but they just get flooded, with applicants, and they don't know how to deal with it, right? And they're going to, miss your interviews, and they're going to, not be fully focused. They're not going to be prepared. As a company, you don't want that, right? You don't want to get that reputation that it's, first of all, hard to get into your company, and it's shitty to apply for it. Because that's really the face of, why people would want to work for you. And it's really going to deter the top talent that you want. So you're going to hurt yourself twice. You're going to create a lot of work for yourself, and you're actually going to scare away the people that you want to attract. So that's the key. Yeah. Look at the hiring process there.
I think that's great advice. So, all right. So where can people find out more about you, learn about Acework, and, maybe you personally?
So I think we're pretty good on most social media channels. Like the website is acework.io. So we have one of those techie type URLs. Acework.io, that's our website. Same goes for like Instagram handles and Facebook. Like that's where you can find us. If you want to connect with me, LinkedIn, very important. Go on LinkedIn. We do a lot of content on LinkedIn as well, both for companies and candidates. We run webinars or like live sessions for candidates every once in a while, usually once a month, where they can learn more about remote work, or we coach them. We do like live LinkedIn review sessions, for example. How can you improve your LinkedIn profile? Those kind of things. They're all free, so you can get on those. And yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn. Put something in the why do you want to connect box. That's a key feature or a key to success with me. Because I'd like to get some context, but then I'm generally pretty happy to connect with people.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time, Angelina. I really appreciate it. I think you had a lot of great advice for people. And like she said, it's acework.io. You can find her on LinkedIn. It's Angelina Ebeling once again. And thanks so much for coming on the show. We appreciate you.
Thanks, Ryan.
I don't owe you anything.